He's ordinary. No hidden bloodline, no secret talent, no chosen one destiny. Just an average guy who got carried by his friend's skill for years. So how did he end up running the most feared guild in the capital? With an S-rank swordswoman who worships the ground he walks on? This is the story of Cry, the accidental guild leader who spent his entire career trying and failing to just blend in. Act 1, a secret hiding in plain sight. In a world where treasure hunters are treated like royalty, teams of adventurers explore ancient temples formed from raw magical energy, hunting monster-like phantoms for fame and fortune. A far cry from the humble childhood pack of a group of kids who once swore to sweep up all the world's wealth for themselves. At a crowded tavern hosting recruitment for the capital's most influential organization, the Hidden Foot Guild, a nervous new hunter named Judah strikes up a conversation with a quiet, unassuming man named Cry. She's a fresh level 3 hunter, hoping to tackle a dangerous target called the White Wolf, still visibly overwhelmed by the sheer size of the crowd around her. Their conversation is repeatedly interrupted, first by a scarred bully mocking Judah for daring to talk to Cry, who's clearly recognized by everyone around them, then by a boastful swordsman named Gilbert, loudly declaring himself a newly descended martial arts expert and the strongest fighter alive, determined to force his way into the capital's most elite team. As tensions rise into a brewing fight, a fierce swordswoman named Tino storms in to shut Gilbert down, only to suddenly abandon the confrontation entirely mid-motion, rush past everyone, and shield Cry from the chaos, addressing him with unmistakable reverence as Guild Leader. The famous team Captain Arx greets him just as casually, suggesting they grab drinks together like old friends. In an instant, Cry's carefully maintained anonymity collapses in front of the entire tavern, ruining his lifelong dream of quietly existing as the background character in his own story. Act 2, the making of an accidental leader. The story flashes back years earlier when Cry and his childhood friends first arrived in the capital, dreaming of becoming legendary treasure hunters together, chasing a shared pact they'd made as kids to sweep up all the world's wealth for themselves. While his friends were blessed with extraordinary natural talent, seemingly favored by fate at every turn, Cry remained painfully ordinary by comparison, yet through nothing more than sheer coincidence and an inexplicable main character aura, credit for the group's victories kept landing squarely on his shoulders no matter how little he actually did. Terrified of being nothing but dead weight, Cry tried to quietly leave the group, only for his friend, completely misreading the situation, to naively promote him to leader instead. Impressed by his talent for talking his way through any situation and assuming that skill made him a natural fit to lead, from that point on, Cry found himself commanding a team of monstrously overpowered friends, endlessly plotting his own retirement and never quite managing to pull it off until he'd somehow, almost by accident, become the leader of the Sorrowful Spirit, widely regarded as the strongest guild in the entire capital, a title he never wanted and still isn't entirely sure how he earned. Act 3, a guild leader would rather be anywhere else. Back in the present, Cry oversleeps and shows up late and disheveled to guild business, leading the ever-serious Arx to mistake his exhaustion for an elaborate undercover disguise. Since Cry hadn't even bothered to shower or change out of yesterday's uniform, Tino, who's openly smitten with Cry despite constantly pretending otherwise, suggests kicking the suspiciously handsome newcomer, meaning Arx himself, out of the guild without realizing who she's talking about. When Arx asks whether Cry has finished selecting new recruits, Cry, hoping to dodge responsibility entirely, casually hands the decision-making over to Arx instead, who trusts his judgment completely and agrees on the spot, earning him the disdain of everyone, forced to accept a stranger onto the team purely on Cry's word, resentful of yet another mouth to feed. Amid the chaos, the still boasting Gilbert, who introduces himself with the grandiose nickname Dungeon Sword, catches Cry's attention. Though his swagger outweighs his actual skill, Cry senses real potential and nominates him for training under Arx on one condition: Gilbert must not lose, since he could be killed at any moment otherwise. To sweeten the challenge and cover for his own complete lack of actual combat experience, Cry boasts about his supposedly undefeated record and pulls a ring off his own finger, offering it as a prize to whoever can seize it, triggering an all-out scramble that trashes the tavern and lands. Cry in hot water with guild management the next morning, groveling shamelessly before the branch leader, Gark, and using every ounce of his talent for smooth talking. Cry manages to talk his way into a lighter punishment, a supposedly simple rescue mission to save 5 distressed hunters, which turns out to be one of the guild's most dreaded assignments in disguise. Act 4, Forming the sorrowful spirits, another flashback fills in the guild's origin story. When Cry's friends first tried to register as a team, an overwhelmed, panicking Cry ended up dragged along, despite his best efforts to hang back, eventually blurting out a challenge to fight the strongest swordsman in the room just to escape his own nerves. Forced to choose a team name and symbol on the spot, he picked something deliberately unglamorous, the Suffering Spirits, marked with a Grim Reaper, fully expecting his friends to hate it. Instead, they loved it, cementing the identity of the group that would eventually rule the capital's hunting world. Back in the present, still saddled with the rescue mission Gark handed him, Cry delegates the entire job to Tino, assembling a scrappy makeshift team with Judah, Gray, and the reluctant Gilbert. Sensing the mission is more dangerous than it first appeared, Cry decides not to send them in blind. Act 5. Into the White Wolves. The White Wolf Cave turns out to be a temple born from the near extinction of a proud werewolf species, hunted to the brink of destruction by lone predators, now haunted by increasingly dangerous phantom wolves born from that very tragedy. As Tino's makeshift team pushes deeper, old wounds surface. Gilbert, once so consumed by pride that he abandoned his own struggling teammates back when he first realized how far ahead of them he'd grown, starts to understand exactly how selfish that decision really was. Watching his new allies fight tooth and nail to keep each other alive without a shred of resentment. Gray, meanwhile, is haunted by memories of losing an entire team to his own past recklessness while raiding dungeons just to survive, quietly hoping this mission might finally help him move past it. Tino, ever perceptive, begins to suspect that Cry didn't assemble this team at random, that he chose each of them specifically because of the personal battles they needed to face, treating the mission almost like quiet, deliberate therapy disguised as guild work. Their optimism is tested hard when the group runs into an armed pack of elite wolves guarding the temple's depth, forcing a desperate, coordinated retreat through a narrow tunnel. Gray and Gilbert hold the line so Tino and Judah can escape, both of them getting badly injured in the process. Gilbert thrown hard against a wall after ignoring orders and charging in recklessly. Cornered by the enraged wolf pack, Tino remembers a strange ring Cry gave her earlier and uses it to blind the lead wolf just long enough to create an opening, but it's not enough. Just as everything seems lost, with the wolves closing in for the kill, Cry crashes into the fight himself, having flown in on a malfunctioning, breakless magic cloak he never should have used in the first place, arriving with no way to stop or slow down. Act 6, the guild leader's true face, protected by an enchanted necklace granting him 17 extra lives. Cry lands a genuinely impressive strike on the pack's leader, buying his team precious seconds and momentarily terrifying the surrounding wolves. But knowing the fight is still far from won, once the wolves realize he's mostly bluffing with showy moves, he pulls out one final trick, a dangerous, explosive artifact he's kept hidden on a necklace for emergencies exactly like this one. After a deep breath, he hurls it into the air and detonates it with his ring, clearing their escape route in a massive blast. Knowing his own weak stamina will slow him down, Cry still refuses to leave anyone behind, urging the group forward while doing his best to keep pace himself. Tino, wounded and overwhelmed with emotion, finally understands why she's admired him since the very day his team first rescued her from kidnappers years ago. Underneath all his laziness and reluctance, Cry genuinely never abandons the people counting on him, even when it costs him dearly. Judah, watching the whole ordeal, assumes Cry's struggle to keep up is some kind of noble self-sacrifice, never realizing it's simply his body giving out from exhaustion. Back at the guild afterward, a healed and grateful Tino, Gray, and Gilbert all walk away with newfound respect for their unconventional leader and for each other, having survived something that could easily have ended very differently. Act 7, the shape-shifting mask action later, Cry sets his sights on a rare artifact up for auction, a shape-shifting mask, exactly the kind of disguise he desperately needs to protect his identity now that his old one has broken, since he never leaves the guild without some way to hide his face from potential attackers. Backed by his wealthy but budget-conscious ally, Shichai, whose total war chest sits at exactly 950 million, and joined by the thief Lisa, Cry attends a high-stakes auction crowded with rivals, including the wealthy young Lady Elaine and her father, who are just as determined to win the mask, largely to spite him. Shichai flatly refuses Lisa's suggestion to just steal the artifact outright, insisting that wealth shouldn't be an excuse for such lowly methods, even as Cry mentally braces himself for a likely defeat given their tight budget. Distracted by a golem up for bid that turns out to hold deep personal meaning for Shichai, a memento of friends she lost to imprisonment at the Casa Tower. Cry impulsively decides to win it for her instead, driving the price up past 990 million and draining nearly every coin he has. He only manages to cover the shortfall with an emergency bank draft borrowed from Lucia, leaving himself with nothing left to bid on the very mask he came for in the first place. To his shock, the golem ends up going not to his own team, but to Gray, who'd been secretly bidding on Judah's behalf the entire time without anyone realizing it. With his funds completely exhausted, Cry heads home in defeat, letting Elaine's family claim the mask instead for a comparatively modest 200 million. Finale, a mask, a meltdown, and an unlikely gift. What should have been Elaine's victory quickly turned sour. Her father is furious the family spent a fortune only to learn an unwanted lesson in generosity from Cry. And Elaine herself is left humiliated, stuck with an ugly artifact she's too embarrassed to give to Arx as she'd originally planned. Sensing her despair, the cursed mask begins to whisper to her, and by the time Arx arrives at her family's estate, deliberately unarmed on Cry's strange advice to check on her, Elaine has already lost control entirely, lashing out under the mask's influence and throwing soldiers aside with terrifying, unnatural strength. Calm and steady, Arx manages to talk her down without a single weapon in hand, gently convincing her to remove the mask, a decision that finally makes sense once the dust settles and Arx realizes Cry's warning about weapons was meant to avoid provoking her further. Meanwhile, Lisa and Shichai track down Gray's group and extort a share of their golem winning, using a poison she'd secretly slipped into their drinks earlier as leverage, selling them the antidote for a tidy profit. Back at the guild, a battered but relieved Arx brings Elaine, now free of the mask's grip, before Cry, who immediately tries the artifact on himself out of sheer curiosity. To his own quiet embarrassment, his stats turn out to be too low to even activate it, forcing an automatic shutdown. Elaine, grateful rather than resentful, happily gives him the mask as a keepsake anyway, and the group ends the day together over cake, money recovered, wounds healed, and one particularly deflating realization hanging over Cry. Even a 10-year-old girl turned out to be more powerful than the strongest man in the capital. That's the story of a man who spent years trying to disappear into the background and somehow ended up the most powerful, most reluctant hero the capital has ever seen. One accidental victory at a time. If you want to see everything else Cry gets dragged into next, go check out the full series for yourself and let me know in the comments. Who's carrying this guild harder, Cry or the friend who accidentally